I lied to my mother to protect her. When I told her not to come for Christmas, she thought I was just being a cold, distant soldier pushing her away. She had no idea I was actually boarding a Blackhawk into hostile territory until the Pentagon called my estranged father. The bitter wind whipping across the tarmac in Stuttgart, Germany, was nothing compared to the absolute frost radiating from my cell phone. It was December 14th, and my mother, Evelyn, was crying on the other end of the line. She wasn't the type to weep quietly. Her tears were always weapons, designed to inflict maximum maternal guilt. "I don't understand, Harper," she sobbed, her voice cracking over the encrypted satellite connection I had illegally routed through my personal phone. "I already bought the ticket. It's non-refundable. I thought we could rent a little cabin in the Bavarian Alps. Just the two of us. We haven't spent a Christmas together since you and Gregory pushed me out of the house." She still called my father by his full name, Gregory. It had been 10 years since the divorce, 10 years since my dad, a retired Navy logistics officer, had finally had enough of her unpredictable, emotional volatility. I was the only glue that had kept them together, and when I enlisted, that glue dissolved. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing the phone harder against my ear to drown out the roar of the C-17 Globemaster engines spinning up on the runway behind me. "Mom, listen to me. You cannot come to Germany. I won't even be here. I've been reassigned, temporarily." "Reassigned?" she scoffed, the tears instantly drying up, replaced by that familiar, piercing suspicion. "To where?" "You're a supply chain analyst, Harper. What possible emergency requires a supply chain analyst 2 weeks before Christmas?" That was the lie I had lived for 4 years. My mother thought I tracked shipments of MREs and uniform boots across European bases. She thought I worked in a climate-controlled office with a coffee maker and a predictable 9-to-5 schedule. She didn't know I was a covert intelligence operative attached to a Joint Special Operations Command (JSOC) task force. She didn't know that the heavily armored C-17 behind me wasn't carrying winter boots, but a highly lethal extraction team bound for a black site near the Syrian-Iraqi border. "It's a massive logistics audit," I lied smoothly, the fabrication tasting like ash in my mouth. "A base in Turkey. We have a massive inventory discrepancy. Base command is locking everyone down until it's resolved. All leaves are canceled. If you fly to Munich, you will be sitting in a hotel room by yourself for 2 weeks." "You're doing this on purpose," Evelyn hissed. "You're exactly like your father, cold, unfeeling. Whenever things get slightly difficult, you just build a wall and disappear behind your uniform." The words stung, sinking deep into my chest, but I couldn't afford to care. Not right now. Major Donovan, my commanding officer, was already gesturing sharply from the loading ramp, tapping his wrist. We were wheels up in 5 minutes. "Mom, I have to go. Harper, if you hang up on me..." "I love you, Mom. Merry Christmas." I severed the connection. For a brief second, I stared at the dark screen of my phone, picturing her sitting alone in her immaculate living room in Connecticut, staring at a Christmas tree she had likely decorated perfectly, just waiting for the daughter who was never going to show up. A wave of profound guilt washed over me, but I shoved it down into the dark, locked box in my mind where I kept all my civilian emotions. I powered down the phone, popped out the SIM card, and handed it to the base quartermaster as I walked toward the aircraft. Where I was going, a cell signal was a death sentence. "Everything good back home, Captain?" Major Donovan asked, as I strapped into the webbed seating of the cargo hold. The red jump lights cast a sinister, bloody glow over the faces of the 12 operators sitting across from me. "Just standard holiday drama, sir," I replied, checking the action on my sidearm. "My mother thinks I'm auditing spreadsheets in Ankara." Donovan offered a grim, humorless smile. "Let's hope she never finds out you're actually hunting a rogue munitions dealer in the Badlands. Gear up, Hayes. It's going to be a long flight." As the massive aircraft hurled itself down the runway and lifted into the freezing European sky, I let out a long breath. I had broken my mother's heart, but at least she was safe. At least she was in Connecticut, drinking wine and complaining about me to her friends. I thought the worst thing that could happen that Christmas was my mother being angry at me. I was wrong. The worst thing was about to happen 48 hours later, in the dead of night, in a valley of sand and rock that wasn't on any official map. Operation Winterfall was supposed to be a surgical strike, in and out in under 4 hours. Our target was a heavily fortified compound holding a high-value asset, a defector who possessed the encryption keys to a regional arms syndicate. My job wasn't to kick down doors. I was there to immediately process the digital intel on site, while the operators secured the perimeter. But intelligence is only as good as the moment it's gathered, and ours was fatally flawed. We fast-roped into the compound under the cover of a moonless night. The silence of the desert was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. I hit the ground, my boots sinking into the loose shale, and followed Sergeant Miller, a towering wall of muscle and Kevlar, toward the main structure. We didn't even make it to the door. The ambush was spectacularly coordinated. The initial blast didn't come from the compound. It came from the ridge behind us. An RPG slammed into our exfiltration chopper before it had fully cleared the airspace. The explosion lit up the night sky in a horrific, blossoming fireball of aviation fuel and shattered metal. I was thrown backward, the concussive wave knocking the oxygen from my lungs and shattering my tactical goggles. My head hit a stone wall, and the world dissolved into a high-pitched ringing and terrifying, slow-motion chaos. When I finally managed to open my eyes, dragging myself through the suffocating cloud of dust and smoke, the nightmare had fully materialized. The compound was swarming. Tracer rounds zipped through the air like angry, lethal hornets. I saw Major Donovan dragging a wounded operator behind a crumbling mud brick wall. Sergeant Miller was beside me, returning fire, screaming orders that I couldn't hear over the deafening roar of automatic weapons. "Hayes! Get to the rally point!" Miller grabbed my tactical vest, hauling me to my feet. "We're compromised! The whole valley is rigged!" That was the last thing I heard before the secondary charge detonated beneath the courtyard. The ground literally opened up, swallowing everything. The last sensation I remember was the feeling of weightlessness, falling into the dark, choking earth, and then absolute, profound blackness. Communications went dark, transponders flatlined. To the command center floating in an aircraft carrier hundreds of miles away, my entire unit had just ceased to exist. We were ghosts. Thousands of miles away, in the quiet, snow-blanketed suburbs of Alexandria, Virginia, my father, Gregory Hayes, was sitting in his leather armchair, nursing a glass of bourbon and reading a historical biography. It was 2 a.m. on December 17th. My father was a man built of stoicism and routine. Since retiring from naval intelligence, his life was perfectly ordered. He didn't do surprises, he didn't do drama. When the heavy oak door of his house shuddered under 3 sharp, authoritative knocks, he knew immediately that something was catastrophically wrong. Nobody knocks on a door at 2 a.m. in a snowstorm to deliver good news. He set his bourbon down. His hands, usually steady as bedrock, trembled slightly as he walked to the entryway. He opened the door. Standing on his porch, silhouetted by the yellow glow of the street lamp, were 2 men. One was an army officer in full dress uniform. The other was a man in a dark, impeccably tailored suit, an operative from the Department of Defense. "Gregory Hayes?" the man in the suit asked. His voice was polite, measured, and entirely devoid of emotion. "Yes," my dad replied, his chest tightening. "I am Agent Reynolds, Department of Defense. This is Captain Miller with Army Casualty Assistance. May we come in, sir?" My father stepped back, letting the cold air and the 2 men into his foyer. He didn't ask what this was about. He had served long enough to know the protocol, but his mind was frantically trying to do the math. I was in Germany. I was a supply analyst. The worst that could happen to me was a forklift accident on the loading dock. "Mr. Hayes," Agent Reynolds began, standing rigidly in the living room, "I need to ask you to prepare yourself. What we are about to discuss is classified under national security protocols." My father's brow furrowed. "Classified? My daughter is a logistics officer in Stuttgart." Reynolds exchanged a brief, somber look with the uniformed officer. "Sir, your daughter, Captain Harper Hayes, is not in Germany. She has been operating as an embedded intelligence officer with a Tier 1 asset recovery team." My dad physically stumbled backward, bumping into the edge of his coffee table. The carefully constructed lie I had maintained for 4 years collapsed in a matter of seconds. Tier 1? What? Where is she? 36 hours ago, Captain Hayes's unit was conducting a classified operation in an undisclosed hostile region. The unit was ambushed. They suffered catastrophic losses. We have lost all communication and tracking data with the surviving elements on the ground. Are you telling me she's dead? My father asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous, terrifying whisper. We are telling you that as of 0400 hours Zulu time, Captain Harper Hayes is officially listed as duty status whereabouts unknown, missing in action. Agent Reynolds paused, his expression softening just a fraction. Because of your previous security clearance, you were listed as her primary emergency contact for classified deployments. Her mother, Evelyn, is not cleared for this information. Her mother, my dad whispered, the horror fully dawning on him. Sir, you are forbidden from discussing the nature of her deployment with the press or extended family. However, the protocol dictates that the immediate family must be notified of her MIA status. Since you are the listed point of contact, Base Command has authorized you to inform Evelyn Hayes. My dad stared at them. You want me. The ex-husband she despises. To drive to Connecticut on Christmas week and tell that woman that her only child is missing in a war zone she didn't even know her daughter was in? Yes, sir, the uniformed officer finally spoke. We can provide an escort, but given your family history, the Pentagon believes it would be less volatile coming from you. By 4 a.m., my father was in his truck, driving blindly through a blinding nor'easter storm up the I-95 corridor. He hadn't spoken to my mother in 2 years. Their last conversation had ended in a screaming match over who was responsible for my emotionally stunted personality. Now, he was driving toward her meticulously decorated, picture-perfect house to drop a nuclear bomb on her reality. He rehearsed the words in his head 1,000 times, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles were white. Evelyn? Harper is missing. Evelyn, she lied to us. Evelyn, our little girl might be gone. He arrived in Connecticut just as the pale gray morning light began to bleed through the snow clouds. The house looked like a postcard. Wreaths in the windows, artificial snow sprayed on the glass, a massive tree visible through the front bay window. He walked up the driveway, his boots crunching in the fresh snow. He stood before the bright red door, feeling a level of fear he hadn't experienced since his active duty days. He raised his hand and knocked. It took a minute. He heard the deadbolt slide. The door swung open. My mother stood there in a silk robe, a cup of coffee in her hand, her face instantly twisting from mild annoyance to fierce anger the moment she recognized him. Gregory, she spat, her tone dripping with venom. What the hell are you doing here? If this is about the alimony. Evelyn, he interrupted, his voice breaking instantly. All his rehearsed stoicism vanished. He looked at the woman he had once loved, the mother of his child, and the tears he had fought back for 6 hours finally spilled over his cheeks. Evelyn, it's Harper. My mother froze. The anger melted off her face, replaced by a sudden, paralyzing terror. She looked at his tears, looked at the black SUV idling in her driveway with military plates, and the coffee cup slipped from her fingers, shattering into 100 pieces on the hardwood floor. The darkness pressing against my eyelids was thick, tasting of copper and pulverized limestone. I drifted in and out of consciousness, my mind struggling to piece together the violent jigsaw puzzle of the last few minutes. My body felt as though it had been run over by a freight train, every nerve screaming in protest as I finally forced my eyes open. There was no ambient light. None. Just a suffocating, terrifying pitch black. I reached blindly for my tactical vest, my fingers clumsy and slick with my own blood. I found the small, military-grade flashlight clipped to my shoulder strap and clicked it on. The narrow beam pierced the dust-choked air, illuminating a claustrophobic nightmare. I was lying at the bottom of a collapsed subterranean tunnel. The secondary explosion hadn't just destroyed the courtyard, it had collapsed the ceiling of a hidden smuggling route we hadn't known existed. Miller? I croaked, my voice sounding like gravel grinding against metal. Major Donovan? Only the ominous shifting of loose rock answered me. I dragged myself upward, my left leg burning with a fiery agony. My fibula was fractured, but the adrenaline surging through my system temporarily muted the worst of it. I swept the flashlight beam across the debris field. About 20 yards away, a reflection caught the light, a shattered combat helmet. I scrambled over the jagged rocks, ignoring the tearing in my muscles. It was Sergeant Miller. He was pinned beneath a massive concrete slab, his breathing shallow and erratic. His eyes fluttered open as the flashlight beam hit his face, covered in a thick mask of gray dust and crimson blood. "Captain," he wheezed, coughing up a fine mist of dirt. "Tell me you have a radio." "Comms are dead," I said, dropping to my knees beside him and desperately assessing the slab. It was easily 1,000 pounds. I couldn't move it, not even an inch. The blast wiped out the transponders. "We're buried, Sergeant. Where's Donovan? Where's the rest of the team?" Miller's eyes dimmed with a haunting realization. "Gone, Hayes. They were in the center of the blast radius when the courtyard dropped. It's just us." He gripped my forearm, his fingers digging into my sleeve with surprising strength. "Listen to me. The defector. It was a setup. I heard the enemy chatter right before the blast. They knew our exact insertion vector. They were waiting for us." A cold dread pooled in my stomach, far more chilling than the subterranean air. We had been lured into a slaughterhouse. Meanwhile, 6,000 miles away, in the idyllic, snow-covered suburbs of Connecticut, a different kind of darkness was descending. My mother, Evelyn, sat perfectly still on her pristine white sofa, staring at the shattered remains of her favorite coffee mug on the hardwood floor. She hadn't moved to clean it up. She hadn't spoken since my father, Gregory, delivered the news. The silence in the living room was absolute, heavy with the weight of a decade's worth of unspoken resentments, and the sudden, crushing reality of my disappearance. Gregory stood awkwardly near the fireplace, his broad shoulders slumped. The military stoicism that had defined his entire life and ultimately ruined their marriage had vanished, leaving behind a terrified, aging father. "She told me she was in Turkey," Evelyn finally whispered, her voice devoid of its usual sharp edge. "She said she was auditing spreadsheets. Gregory, she said I couldn't visit because she'd be stuck in an office." "Evelyn, she was protecting you," Gregory said softly, taking a cautious step forward. "She couldn't tell us the truth. The Department of Defense." "Do not quote the Department of Defense to me!" Evelyn suddenly screamed, springing to her feet, her face flushed with a terrifying mixture of rage and profound grief. "You did this! You instilled this obsession with duty and secrets in her. You taught her that lying to her family was an acceptable collateral damage for wearing that uniform." "I didn't want her in JSOC!" Gregory fired back, tears welling in his eyes again. "Do you think I wanted my little girl dropping into hostile valleys in the middle of the night? I told her to take the logistics desk job. I begged her, Evelyn." The fight drained out of my mother as quickly as it had erupted. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the floor amidst the ceramic shards of her broken mug. She began to sob, the wretched, unrestrained weeping of a parent who realizes they might never see their child again. Gregory didn't hesitate. The years of bitterness evaporated. He dropped to his knees beside her, wrapping his arms around her shaking frame. For the first time in 10 years, they held each other, two shattered parents clinging to a fading hope, waiting for a phone to ring with news they were terrified to hear. Back in the suffocating darkness of the collapsed tunnel, time had lost all meaning. It could have been hours. It could have been days. I had managed to pack Miller's wounds with hemostatic gauze from my trauma kit, but his pulse was growing thready. "Hayes," Miller whispered, his voice barely audible over the dripping of groundwater. "Leave me. Follow the draft. There's air moving from the north tunnel. You have to get the intel out. You have to tell command we have a mole." "I am not leaving you behind, Sergeant." "That is not how this works," I replied, gritting my teeth as I blindly wrapped a makeshift splint around my fractured leg using pieces of a shattered rifle stock and my rig belt. Protocol dictates that mission parameters supersede individual survival, but humanity dictates you never leave a man in the dark. I grabbed my flashlight and limped toward the northern edge of the tunnel. The air here was slightly cooler, carrying the faint, unmistakable scent of cordite and diesel fuel. I pushed through a narrow fissure in the rocks, dragging myself through the dirt until the tunnel unexpectedly widened into a subterranean bunker. My heart hammered against my ribs. The bunker was illuminated by a single, flickering fluorescent bulb hooked up to a portable generator, and sitting on a rusted metal table was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, an old Soviet-era shortwave radio system. The enemy must have used this bunker as a secondary comms relay. I lunged for the console. The equipment was archaic, but the physics of radio frequencies remained the same. My hands flew across the dials, desperately trying to bypass the crude local encryption and lock onto a continuous wave frequency used by American surveillance drones that I knew loitered in the upper stratosphere of this sector. I grabbed the heavy plastic microphone. Any station on this net. Any station on this net. This is Romeo Echo Actual. Blind transmission. Broken arrow. I repeat, broken arrow. Authenticate Delta Niner Charlie. Do you copy? Static hissed through the speaker. A mocking, empty, white noise. I adjusted the squelch, my bloody fingers slipping on the dials. Please, I prayed to a god I hadn't spoken to since I enlisted. Please, just hear me. Any station on this net. This is Captain Harper Hayes. JSOC Task Force Winterfall. We are compromised. Heavy casualties. I need immediate exfiltration. Over. Nothing but the relentless hissing static. I dropped my head against the cold metal console, the exhaustion finally overwhelming my adrenaline. I had failed. I was going to die down here in the dark, and my mother would forever believe I had pushed her away for Christmas because I didn't love her enough. Then, a voice broke through the static, crisp, and distinctly American. Romeo Echo Actual, this is Overwatch Actual. We copy your transmission. Authenticate accepted. Tracking your signal bounce now. Hold your position, Captain. The cavalry is coming. The extraction was a blur of deafening rotor wash, blinding searchlights, and the chaotic beauty of an elite quick reaction force descending upon the valley like avenging angels. They dug us out. They hauled the concrete slab off Sergeant Miller, stabilizing him with aggressive field medicine, and strapped us both into the belly of an MH-60 Pave Hawk helicopter. As the chopper banked hard, ascending into the starry night sky, I looked down at the smoking crater that had almost been my tomb. I was alive. 72 hours later, it was Christmas Eve. In Connecticut, the snow was falling in thick, heavy flakes, blanketing Evelyn's neighborhood in a pristine, cinematic white. The Christmas tree in the living room was lit, but the presents beneath it looked like a cruel mockery. Gregory and Evelyn were sitting at the kitchen table. They hadn't slept in 3 days. They had existed on black coffee, silent prayers, and the agonizing dread of waiting for the black DOD SUV to pull into the driveway. At 6:45 p.m., the silence was shattered by the shrill, jarring ring of the kitchen telephone. Evelyn gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Gregory instantly stood up, his chair scraping violently against the tile floor. He stared at the phone as if it were an explosive device. On the third ring, his trembling hand reached out and picked up the receiver. "Hello?" Gregory asked, his voice tight, preparing for the military casualty officer's formal tone. "Dad?" Gregory froze. All the air left the room. He gripped the edge of the kitchen counter to stop his legs from collapsing. "Harper? Harper? Is that you?" Evelyn let out a fractured, breathless cry, practically tackling Gregory to get her ear next to the phone. "It's me, Dad." My voice echoed through the line, sounding exhausted, raspy, but undeniably alive. "I'm at Ramstein Air Base in Germany. I'm okay. I'm coming home." "Harper!" Evelyn shrieked, tears streaming down her face, ripping the phone from my father's hands. "Harper, my baby, you're alive!" They told us. They told us you were missing. I sat in a sterile medical bay, thousands of miles away, my leg in a heavy cast, my face bruised and bandaged, listening to my mother weep. But this time, they weren't tears of manipulation or guilt. They were the pure, unadulterated tears of a mother's profound love. "I'm so sorry, Mom," I whispered, fighting back my own sobs. I'm so sorry I lied to you. I just wanted to keep you safe. I didn't want you to worry about what I really do. I don't care about the lies, Harper, Evelyn cried, gripping my father's hand tightly. I don't care about any of it. I just want my daughter. Please, just come home. I'm boarding a transport jet in an hour. I'll be in Connecticut by Christmas morning. When the military transport vehicle finally pulled into my mother's driveway the next morning, the sun was shining brightly off the fresh snow. I hobbled out of the back seat on aluminum crutches, wearing a standard-issue gray tracksuit because my uniform had been cut to shreds by the medics. The front door flew open before I even reached the walkway. Evelyn ran out into the freezing cold without a coat, her bare feet sinking into the snow. She didn't care. She threw her arms around my neck, sobbing uncontrollably, burying her face into my shoulder. I dropped one of my crutches to hold her tight, burying my face in her hair, breathing in the familiar scent of vanilla and lavender that meant home. Gregory walked out behind her, stopping on the porch. He looked at me, taking in the bruises, the cast, the sheer exhaustion etched into my face. He didn't offer a crisp military salute or a stoic nod. He just walked down the steps and wrapped both of us in a massive, trembling bear hug. "We're so proud of you, Harper," my dad whispered fiercely into my ear. "But if you ever pull a stunt like that again, I will personally court-martial you." I let out a weak, tearful laugh. We walked inside, leaving the cold and the secrets behind us. We sat by the fire, just the three of us. My parents didn't argue. They didn't bring up the divorce. For the first time in a decade, we were a family again, forged in the agonizing crucible of a near tragedy. I had spent my entire adult life trying to protect my mother from the brutal reality of my world, building walls of deception to keep her comfortable. But as she sat next to me, gently resting her hand on my cast and looking at me with nothing but fierce, unyielding pride, I realized I had severely underestimated her. She didn't need me to protect her with lies. She just needed me to come home. And as the Christmas lights twinkled in the quiet room, reflecting off the falling snow outside, I knew that I finally had. The war would always be there, waiting in the shadows. But today, the only thing that mattered was the peace I had found in the living room I had tried so hard to avoid. Did this story of survival, military secrets, and the unbreakable bond of family keep you on the edge of your seat? The realities our service members face are often hidden behind closed doors to protect the ones they love most. If Harper's intense journey touched your heart, please drop a like, share this incredible story with your friends and family, and don't forget to subscribe for more gripping, real-life, dramatic tales. Your support means everything.